Buenos días a todos y todas las presentes. Vamos a dar inicio a nuestro coloquio PRELUC Pasión por las Letras edición 2024 y para abrir vamos a tener unas gentiles palabras del decano, Patricio Lizama.
Hola, muy buenos días a todos, a todas. A mí me alegra estar acá en este encuentro, en este coloquio, y quisiera situar un poco lo que estamos haciendo en este coloquio. Lo primero, estamos en una semana que es muy productiva. A mí me alegra mucho porque es parte, lo que hacemos en esta semana es parte de lo que debe ser nuestra formación. Ayer comenzó la semana con la actividad de Letras en Diálogo. Como ustedes saben, esa actividad organizada por la Dirección de Docencia, por el profesor Francisco Orellana, de lo que trata es de hacer un levantamiento de las inquietudes, de los problemas, de las iniciativas que se desarrollan en la facultad en particular a partir de los estudiantes. Entonces, esa actividad convoca no solo a los estudiantes, sino que también a los profesores. De modo que es una manera de poner atención a lo que ustedes quieren, necesitan, es dialogar con los profesores, es en definitiva una instancia de hacer comunidad. Yo ayer lamentablemente no pude estar, pero he estado en las otras versiones, he visto lo relevante que es esa instancia, la hemos compartido con la gente de la dirección superior en Casa Central. En verdad les ha gustado mucho lo que es esa iniciativa. Ahora, lo otro, el encuentro de hoy día y de mañana, ¿cierto? Coloquio de pregrado, eso también es algo que tiene una pequeña historia. Eso comenzó en el Campus Oriente, había una semana de literatura, otra de lingüística, al final una semana de letras, y en el fondo dentro de esa semana había actividades deportivas, se invitaban a escritores, por cierto, el coloquio de pregrado. Entonces, ustedes retoman una actividad que de nuevo se hace en conjunto con los profesores, es una reflexión sobre lo que ustedes están trabajando, sobre lo que ustedes aprenden, es una instancia también de hacer visible lo que es el trabajo universitario, porque es un diálogo de estudiantes y de profesores, ¿cierto? Esa formación, ese diálogo de maestro y discípulo, esa transmisión de un saber intergeneracional, eso también es el coloquio de pregrado. Y por cierto, una autorreflexión de parte de ustedes sobre lo aprendido en literatura, en lingüística, en traducción. Entonces, las disciplinas de nuestra facultad. Mañana hay en este coloquio una invitada, dice ahí invitada, sorpresa. Yo pregunté a Francisco si podíamos hablar y develar lo que era la sorpresa. Y me dijo que sí. La sorpresa es ni más ni menos que la Premio Nacional de Literatura, la poeta Elvira Hernández. No es menor eso, no es menor que ella haya accedido a venir a esta facultad y de nuevo en relación a lo que ya hemos hecho. Recuerdo que en Campus Oriente, en el mismo contexto de lo que ustedes hoy día inician, visitó la facultad José Donoso, en otro año visitó la facultad Jorge Teller, también en otra oportunidad estuvo el cineasta Silvio Cayosi. En fin, ustedes retoman una tradición que por cierto es fundamental, el diálogo con, en este caso, con una premio nacional. También veo en el programa el diálogo con escritores y escritoras de la facultad. De modo que eso también es parte de lo que nosotros hacemos. El jueves, graduación de la pedagogía en inglés. Cierre de un ciclo, cierre de una etapa de formación. Sabemos que esa formación continúa en la vida, pero el jueves es un cierre de esa primera etapa. Y el viernes hay una actividad vinculada con el Día de la Interculturalidad. Eso es acá, en el Auditorium de Historia. Van a venir poetas, hombres y mujeres de pueblos originarios, de modo que los invitamos a participar a esa actividad el viernes a las 11. Lo segundo que quería señalar, también me parece muy productivo, advertir en el programa cuestiones nuevas, enfoques nuevos sobre las disciplinas que nosotros cultivamos, así como hay enfoques de manifestaciones nuevas y enfoques nuevos, más allá del texto. También está la tradición y la revisita a la tradición, ¿cierto? Miramos ese legado desde nuevos enfoques, desde nuevas perspectivas. También el programa recoge lo que decíamos recién, lingüística, literatura, traducción. Entonces estamos recogiendo, estamos reflexionando sobre ese énfasis que se articula en la nueva malla de las ambas licenciaturas. Es una muy buena oportunidad para encontrar nuevos temas, para encontrar otras oportunidades de desarrollo. Pienso, por ejemplo, en lo que es escritura creativa, ¿cierto? Lo que es trabajo de análisis de las plataformas donde aparece la creación ahora. Entonces, es algo muy importante dialogar con esa nueva formación, con esas nuevas oportunidades y campos laborales. También a mí me parece que la instancia de pregrado y estos temas ayudan, ¿cierto?, a ustedes a ir buscando, a vislumbrar lo que puede ser un desarrollo posterior, es decir, algo que siempre nosotros hemos enfatizado. La formación va, ¿cierto?, por lo que es las clases, los créditos, etcétera, pero también va por otro lado, y en este trabajo que va por lo extracurricular, ustedes necesitan encontrar finalmente lo que es su vocación. Entonces me parece que todo este trabajo permite eso, permite enfrentarse a nuevos textos, a nuevos enfoques, y por ahí ustedes empiezan a entender qué es lo que más les gusta, qué es lo que quieren hacer y cómo quieren proyectarse años más tarde. Cierro estas palabras sintetizando en el fondo lo que es este coloquio. A mí me parece que es y pone de manifiesto lo que son las habilidades de un estudiante universitario del siglo XXI. En primer lugar, modos de pensar, ¿cierto?, creatividad, innovación. Esto que ustedes hacen ciertamente es eso. Desarrollo del pensamiento crítico. Hacen un trabajo reflexivo, autorreflexivo sobre lo que ustedes leen, sobre lo que ustedes han aprendido en las clases. En segundo lugar, modos de trabajar. Eso es colaboración, trabajo en equipo, comunicación fluida entre ustedes, comunicación fluida entre ustedes y los profesores. Por último, modos de vivir. Estamos hablando de literatura hispanoamericana, de literatura inglesa, norteamericana, de plataforma, de manifestaciones que aparecen en el mundo global. Entonces, desarrollo local, regional, pero también global, y lo que mencionábamos el viernes, ¿cierto? Día de la interculturalidad. Entonces, modos de vivir, cómo vive hoy día el estudiante universitario en un mundo desplegado, cambiante, interconectado, pero finalmente global. Eso es lo que ustedes hacen a través de estas distintas ponencias, de modo que los felicito al centro de alumnos, felicito al grupo en particular que ha organizado todo esto, y por cierto también a los ponentes que están hoy día aquí y que comienzan esta actividad. Gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, Decano, por sus lindas palabras. Bueno, muchas gracias a todas las autoridades presentes. Ahora abrimos nuestro coloquio con nuestro primer panel llamado Thinking Outside the Text. Este panel es un panel interdisciplinario en inglés y está moderado por la docente Camila Galdames. Camila, invitamos a pasar. Camila enseña lingüística y este semestre hace clases de English Language, The Linguistics of Metaphors y Applied Grammar 2, entre otros ramos. A continuación se presentan los siguientes trabajos: Gender Fiction as a Political Tool, The Non-Escapist Escapism of Morris News from Nowhere, paper de literatura escrito por Francisca Gutiérrez, quien es estudiante de cuarto año de Letras Inglesas UC. Sus áreas de interés dentro de la literatura son el espacio narrativo y análisis contextual paratextual. Prefiere literatura especulativa y atmosférica. Su libro favorito es Piranesi y su flor favorita es el dedal de oro. Francisca, te invitamos a pasar. Y también se presenta el trabajo Affiliation in Conservative YouTube Media, un trabajo de lingüística realizado en Research por Jefferson Rodríguez Luna, estudiante de Letras Inglesas también de la Universidad Católica. Jefferson está interesado por la lingüística de los computadores. Actualmente se encuentra rindiendo su último ramo del certificado académico de computación e informática sobreviviendo arquitectura de computadores y le gustan mucho los gatos. Jefferson, te invitamos a pasar. Finalmente, les recordamos que si desean hacer preguntas pueden levantar la mano al final de las presentaciones o ponencias, o también pueden escanear el código QR y dejar su pregunta. Al hacerlo de esta última forma, estarán concursando por increíbles premios. Francisca, adelante. El panel es tuyo.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming so early. To begin with this panel of thinking outside the text, I will be presenting a genre analysis specifically regarding the Victorian literature landscape and how politics, genre, and commerce, especially in literature, intersect. So, in order to address this question of how these topics intersect, it's important to understand how genre fiction developed as a response to realism in the Victorian literature landscape. This is not to say that genre fiction was at all invented during the Victorian period, but rather how genre fiction, because of the importance of realism in the Victorian period, developed in order to encompass more styles and content that realism was not equipped to portray. Though Victorian realism emerged as a way to highlight and communicate pressing issues of poverty, industrialization, and the working class, the development of the period saw the emergence of various types of more structured stories: travel literature, mysteries, action novels, and a lot of literature that we might recognize today. I've put up some examples that you might recognize. So in regards to genre fiction and escapism, the stark contrast that we've previously mentioned with realism may be the reason that genre fiction is considered to not be equipped to deal with such issues, considering how they play with verisimilitude and they are quote-unquote detached from reality. But if we look at William Morris's News from Nowhere, we can see that that is factually untrue. William Morris's News from Nowhere is a soft science fiction utopian fantasy novel, which also has a romance plotline, so a lot of heavy genre. And we can see that it doesn't only engage with political matter through its subject, but also through the same content. It is the genre that allows the message to be packaged in a relatively new way and create more awareness. So, as previously mentioned, genre fiction and escapism have an intertwined link. This is because genre fiction is usually defined as a fiction that adheres to a particular style and convention, as we mentioned, and these conventions, especially in connection to escapism, create a sort of familiarity that is easy to sell and consume. This is where we get the negative connotation that commercial fiction is mindless or easy or not engaged with real issues, and we understand escapism as the notion of wanting to escape from the real world through a text. But we can see, as we will analyze, how we can actually combine both things in order to escape somewhere, but also reanalyze the world that we live in. As Harold says in his journal article, literature, genre fiction, and standards of criticism, although familiarity creates comfort, an author or a reader can use these expectations to draw attention to the rules and thematize ideas or illuminate a motif in the story. So diving deeper into how escapism deals into this, we can see that an important factor is who is actually reading these stories and who has access to commercial fiction. Robert Hillman touches on his article, saying that gratifying tales, stirring or soothing, are the fare of those who operate from fairly secure bases in ordinary life, meaning that escapism is almost a luxury and that people who are actually in tough and quote-unquote real-world situations may not have the time or the access to literature, or may not really have the luxury to turn to literature as a tool to escape from their situation. They probably have much more tangible solutions that they might want to turn to. But the people that read escapism, meaning those that operate from fairly secure bases in life, we can assume are sort of sheltered. And so it might specifically be this audience that actually needs to read this kind of literature in order to be exposed and create a cognitive space which they can reinterpret the world through. Just to summarize on that point, escapism needs a heavy dose of realism to prompt its use. If we consider that escapism is in constant conversation with realism and actually tries to reinterpret and defamiliarize the world we live in, it needs problems to engage with and to illuminate. When we consider the connection that we can draw between genre fiction and activism, Wilfried Fluck explains in his paper Fiction and Justice that there are three major reasons why fictional texts have played an increasingly important part in the articulation of individual justice, but we can also apply this to moral justice and activism. Particularly the last two points are important in this study, those being that fiction invites symbolic transfer processes, and fiction is a privileged form of articulating imaginary elements that cannot yet be articulated in any other way. Especially when we consider the audience that is reading these texts, we can consider that escapism creates a cognitive space where people can reinterpret the world through genres fiction or through genres narrative techniques, specifically those of defamiliarization. If we read fantasy or science fiction, the world seems to be turned upside down, and it is exactly that degree of detachment and difference to the world that allows us to see what the world may be lacking or how it may be better. Basically, fiction allows us to not only cross cultural and personal boundaries, but also to articulate imaginary elements and to look at them from the outside. And that is exactly that which can spark political change. If we apply this analysis to News from Nowhere, the allegorical element of science fiction is exactly what draws attention to the flaws of the world, particularly considering capitalism and socialism as a solution. In this particular novel, regardless if you agree or not, that is the allegorical element that is being used, and how it draws attention to the quote-unquote flaws and possible solutions of the world in a safe cognitive space. This might be sort of a niche example, but I feel like a lot of us could relate to maybe villains in media like Thanos. We might not be so quick to sympathize with a villain in real life, but fiction is a safe space where we can consider those other points of view. And particularly for these sort of political commentary, that is an advantage. However, it is not just the subject matter and the allegorical element that allows it's okay. That allows for news from nowhere to engage with political matter, but also its publication medium and its circulation. This novel was originally published in the Commonweal Journal, which was a socialist League newspaper, actually edited and ran by William Morris himself. And this put the text in conversation not only with the paratextual physical news that were being run at the time, so it was a conversation with what was printed on the page, but also it was an already receptive audience that was willing to look at this novel as a possible solution, but also partial to its escapism. This is exactly the kind of utopia these people would be looking for. So when you combine this audience with this text, it is possible, especially considering their social advantages, that this might spark change. However, Shady E. Cosgrove explains that reading provides a site for reflection, but that must be placed with action. Fiction remains theoretical, so the publication medium and the audience that reaches a text, or that a text reaches, is just as important in actually materializing its political potential. So just to conclude, I believe that it is clear that genre fiction can engage heavily with matters of politics, but that it is also important to consider not just how genre and narrative techniques affect this commentary, but also how publishing and context affects the action taken from it. I believe we could draw a comparison, for example, to social media today, and we could even look at the contemporary publishing landscape. For example, the Hunger Games gaining partial or a lot of relevance in the past few years, considering the political landscape, and how maybe the way that we take action today is by placing literature with social media and other grassroots movements. Thank you. Further reading, if you want.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm sorry I'm a little bit sick, so my voice is gonna be weird. And I'm going to talk about my research paper that I have done with the help of Professor Jing Hao. In particular, my topic is conservative media. And so I'll just start right away with the topic. The topic of my research, why conservative media and why YouTube? Well, the topic is conservative political discourse. And in that regard, my study aims to make explicit how language resources are used to construct community within the values of political right. So my research, in more simpler terms, deals with how language resources, how they maintain and build communities. So why YouTube of all things? Well, this is all situated within internet media, and that is because internet is pretty relevant, and it's all got to do with the transformation of media creation. In the past, when the people who had the capability of creating media were a bunch of people with power, but nowadays the landscape has transformed entirely, and communities, well, people all over the world can create content, and they can spread their voice. So in that regard, communities have been transformed, and nowadays we are not limited by geography, but rather communities exist online, and everyone can spread their voice. So I'm going to now talk about the context of my investigation and the underlying theory behind it. So I'll just start with the analytical framework. And I have drawn upon SFL theory, and the two main aspects of the theory I use to analyze conservative media, particularly YouTube conservative media, is theory of individuation, and the analytical tool I have used is evaluation, and within SFL, which is appraisal. Now, individuation as a theory basically is this graph right here, and it talks about basically meaning potential. When we talk about a culture, we are looking at a bunch of meaning potential. And as this meaning potential is specialized within a culture, you'll start to see that certain groups develop, and the more you specialize in meaning, the more closer you get to the individual. That is individuation. But I'm more concerned with affiliation. which is the opposite route. If you go from the individual and how they specialize their meaning, you'll see that certain people align their meaning resources into certain groups. And this alienation, this is exactly what builds communities. Now, how do I study this? Well, that is to evaluative language, how people evaluate certain things and express their opinions. Now, evaluative language within appraisal is a cluster of resources. It's concerned with the interpersonal meta function, which is basically a function of language which deals with enacting relationships, basically establishing a role for a person within a community. The first of the subsystems of appraisal is attitude, basically evaluations of all sorts. The first one is affect and is concerned with more primal emotions. The next one is judgment, concerned with evaluations of people. And the last one is appreciation, in which is basically evaluations of things and people's performance. It is important that when you combine meanings, in this case evaluative meanings, with ideational meanings, that is targets, people who you're evaluating or things you're evaluating, you create a coupling. And when people identify these couplings and they agree with them, we create what is called a bond. The bond is the building block of communities, and is how people align their meanings into a specific meaning potential communities. Now, graduation is two things. The first is the scaling of attitudinal resources, and it's pretty straightforward. Basically, if you have an attitude, you can intensify it. Basically, that is good, for instance, and that is very good, or that is quite good. So it's a scale of attitudinal resources. And we also have focus with this, which is basically the scaling of non-attitudinal resources. So, for instance, you can talk about a policeman being a real policeman or a fake policeman. These are things that are usually not non-graded. Finally, we have engagement, and this is pretty relevant for my analysis because we are talking about different voices within the text. And there are two types of voices: monogloss, in which the only voice recognized is the voice of the author, and heterogloss, in which you recognize multiple voices. In particular, with heterogloss, there are language resources which serve to construct the dialogic space and to expand it, basically either discouraging the involvement of the different voices or encouraging the involvement of the different voices. Now with the data, I have chosen YouTube of all platforms because it's quite different, and it's concerned with the creation of online communities, and it's particularly talks about the creation of internet communities. So there is a space for spreading different voices, and in terms of the political discourse, is an ideal place for spreading ideas and building communities. So my data deals with conservative media, and specific YouTube channel I have chosen, which is called Pregrado, and this is a channel which channels different conservative voices. I have chosen it because I think it represents very well the ideas of conservative YouTube. It's a non-profit which is given a lot of money from a lot of conservative groups, and at the same time it invites people to spread their voice, to talk about different topics. And so this is the channel, and the video I have chosen is a video called Conservatives of the Real Environmentalist. It's a 5 video from a series of 5 minutes video format, and it's a really small sample of Pregrado content regarding environmental issues. So this is information of the video. The speaker is a man called Michael Knowles. It's a pretty short video. And the video itself is concerned with the ways of protecting the environment, and it addresses the ways of protecting the environment, either the conservative ways of protecting the environment or the environmentalist ways. So yeah, the analysis aims to disclose affiliation use, and appraisal theory serves for the recognition of affiliation patterns. So how I have grouped my results? Well, I have grouped them in terms of target. So we find simple targets, basically one thing being evaluated, and contrasting targets, in which basically you have the same target, but there is a different polarity. That is, the appreciations are either positive or negative, and that makes contrast. So the first target that I have identified is concerned with conservative related targets. So you see here that there is there's an interest in talking about conservative people. In fact, the whole idea of national parks was created by a Republican, Ulysses Grant. The park system was really expanded by another Republican, Teddy Roosevelt. So you see here how judgments are positive, and I'm going to talk about that in the last part of affiliation. So here is a little representation of the couplings. Basically, this is H is a target with an evaluation, and the second type of target is environment-related targets. In this case, most of the evaluations are concerned with emotion. When we talk about the environment, we talk in positive terms. At least that is what the conservatives do in this video. The final simple target is nation-related targets, and you can see that the opinion in this case it's negative. Today, for the last century, the worst environmentalist offenders have been big, repressive socialist governments. This was true in the last century, and it is true now. China, for example, pumps roughly twice as much carbon into the air each year as the United States. So most of the appreciations are negative. And you can start to see how an image is being painted, how negative appreciations are directed towards the opposition, while positive evaluations are directed towards us. The most important thing I think of my paper is opposing couplings. In this case, negative evaluations. So these are evaluations of the progressives, which are positive, and at the same time, conservatives negatively evaluate the same target. So in this case, what is being positively assessed by the progressives is their ways of protecting the environment. What is being negatively evaluated by the conservatives is their way of protecting the environment. Finally, we find positive evaluation, and as you can imagine, what is being positively assessed by the conservatives is their ways of protecting the environment. And in this case, they talk about fracking. Fracking is the main thing they talk about when talking about their ways of protecting the environment, and it's a topic related to innovation. So affiliation, in this case, helps us explain why we find these patterns. Here is one of the only couplings of couplings I have identified, which is basically an appreciation of an appreciation. They say that conservatives hate the environment, and conservatives say that that is a caricature. Of course, this all aims to mend the image of conservatives within the video. So we evaluate positively conservatives because we want to improve and to basically appropriate the idea of conservatives, of environmentalists. We are the real environmentalists, and we have done all of this. At the same time, we bond by an assumption of shared values. The intrinsic value of nature is present by the use of emotional evaluations. And because of this, you don't make explicit assessments of the value of environment, but you assume that the people share that opinion. And of course, that is anticipating the view that people have of conservatives hating the environment. So in this case, he is assuming, he's not debating the views that exist outside the text. Finally, they bond in negative judgment. So they basically create a view of leftist or progressive countries which are not environmentalists for him. And this can be seen in the ways of their ways, of our ways. So there's a dismantlement of their way, in which we talk negatively about their ways of protecting the environment, while we talk about our way of protecting the environment positively. So fracking is the most relevant thing here, because when we talk about their way, there is a very small portion of discourse which is concerned with introducing their way. Engagement is used to introduce the voice of the progressives, only to then close the dialogic space and talk about the view of the conservatives. The same is done when we talk about our way. It's not addressed, the criticism of fracking is not strongly assessed by the progressives. We only get a very small glimpse of what they think, and then this dialogic space is closed to introduce the view of the conservatives about the environment. So, as a matter of conclusion, we have seen that language resources are strategically chosen with the purpose of building and maintaining community. The way this is done, at least for the video I have studied, is through the specific selection of targets and the establishment of contrasts. This is complemented by the use of voice within the text, opening the dialogic space only to close it immediately after having introduced a view to make contrast with. This is all relevant for the formation of bonds, as viewers are given multiple opportunities to agree with conservative point of views, either positive or negative. Things, negative evaluations of people or negative evaluations of their way, followed by positive assessments of our way, contributed to the formation of an us versus them binary type of narrative. Of course, this is only a small view onto the opinions of conservatives, but of course further research could improve and give us a better glimpse at how they think and how communities are built and maintained. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you both. That was very, very interesting. And I want to start by asking you, what drove you to do this type of research? Was there a political thinking behind it, or did it come after?
For me personally, it was a given assignment regarding the use of realism versus genre fiction, and to me it seemed only natural that the use would be political, considering the point of realist literature. And I also thought a lot of contemporary books like The Hunger Games or pretty much any other sci-fi or like dystopia, like 1984, and I thought, it's like, it's something that you still see in modern literature, and so I thought, like, of course not. Like, of course genre fiction can engage with issues because we see it now. So that was my reasoning.
Thank you.
Well, in my case, it's because when I was younger, I remember that around 2015, there was a huge spread of conservative propaganda in YouTube, and it was all related to creating an image of conservative people as incredible, amazing, and objective. And I remember that at the time that was pretty convincing. And I was wondering how this conservative media could affect other people who are younger than me now and who are vulnerable to certain to the strategic manipulation of discourse. So that's why I chose this particular channel, because I thought it was representative of what these type of channels try to do, basically creating an ideal image, in this case of conservatives being the real environmentalists.
Thank you. Thank you. Absolutely. And thinking about both genres, right? We understand that there are limits, there are some constraints to both. But let's talk about the audience for a moment, right? Because we know that it is made with a purpose, it has a certain intent. But what about the audience? Do you think there needs to be some sort of willingness, there needs to be some openness to it? And what you were talking about affiliation, right? Do you think there needs to be this sort of mirroring image?
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah,
Sorry.
sure. The question goes more to like the audience. What happens with the audience, right? Since our topic is outside the text. Do you think there needs to be a certain disposition when engaging with the medium that you've chosen?
Well, it's pretty interesting because in this case we're talking about YouTube. So the algorithms basically help building small communities, and it helps people. It helps them getting recommend a video that they might be interested in. So because of that, the audience is already. I guess they are already vulnerable to these types of idea. They already kind of think this way, and they only need a push in order to think a certain way. So after they have been convinced, quote unquote, they start to get involved in this bubble, and then they don't get out of it. So.
Yeah, and regarding like traditionally published literature, I think there has to be more of a willingness there, because you have to get the book somehow. So if it's a purchase, then you've looked into it, you want to get it, or if someone recommended it to you, like I think maybe choosing a book is more intentional. Maybe in the case of News from Nowhere, because it was in the newspaper, not as much, but also it's a very specific newspaper for certain members, so there is already a predisposition. But I think with social media, it's much more vulnerable. Like, you don't really have a choice.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting. Why do you think that is? Like the choice aspect?
Well, I think, especially if we think of younger people, it's not a conscious choice what you build, as Jeff said, like the algorithm with. Maybe, yeah, this is more your area, but like, I don't think that it's so much like, I want to watch conservative YouTubers and you search them up. I think they just show up, and because of their manner of speaking, which like charismatic leadership and communication skills, I think it's a much more psychological, manipulative thing, like social media in general. So I think that that kind of political speech aligns with that method more than maybe traditional literature.
Thank you. And thinking about like traditional literature, and like you were saying, how it has to be a bit more intentional, but yet if we think about like the Hunger Games, or we think about all of these movies, even Marvel, right? Even Marvel is guilty of using exactly what you were explaining in your paper about the opposition, right? It creates a very clear genre or a very clear line of narrative that we follow, and we know who the good guys are, we know who the bad guys are, which leads us to this idea of the binaries, of these oppositions of like the good or bad, conservative, progressive, us versus them, right? So how do you think, both linguistically and in literature, how do you think this is represented?
I think in literature, again, especially considering, I'm thinking like young adults,
Yes.
or middle grade, I think in literature, it be a lot more subtle. It's not really like a political label. It's just there's people who do good things, and then there's people who do bad things. And I think that's why the modern reader really likes this morally gray or like defendable villain sort of figure, because I think it has like a depth of interest that maybe we've been robbed of in the past, like in the 2010s literature scape. But I think that this opposition is so much more subtle when it's in like young media, that it's not even about politics, it's more about manners and behavior, and it's a much more subtle type of ideology. So I don't think it's constructed with such like well, of course it's an ideology, but I don't think it's constructed as like these kids should grow up to be liberalists. I think it's more about like, maybe we should all be nice to each other because you're 10.
Right.
Well, in regards to my study, you have seen, well, at least what I can say is that it's pretty straightforward how binaries are constructed, because this is easily digestible content. So
Absolutely.
it is pretty straightforward. And what is done is basically that we choose certain targets, and then we present the evaluations of the opposite to then present our own evaluations. It is interesting too, because there is a misrepresentation of the opposite party. There is not much said. There is not much of their voice, and it's only introduced to present our own view. But by presenting these oppositions in targets, in evaluations of the same targets, we are constructing this dichotomy, and there is no building of intermediate ground to which people can clinch. Of course, this is all aiming towards building community. So you cannot, you don't want people to join an intermediate path. You want them to join your team. So that is how it's done, basically, through evaluation and through the creation of oppositions. And another thing that is interesting is that it is not addressed. There are not many couplings of couplings. Basically, there is not evaluations of evaluations. There is not an engagement with the ideas of the opposite party. So it is easier to detach yourself from what they think, because we are only looking at evaluations. And if you're already drawn to these ideas, you'll pick the idea you like.
Absolutely.
You don't have to question nothing, basically.
Exactly. And I don't know if you realize, but both of you have like aligned to the same type of answer, which is that even if it's for preschool or not preschool, even if any type of writing, any type of literature, it does align with certain values, right? Even if we think of like, yes, it's just like be a good person. I mean, that's quite political. Especially now with the normal climate, being nice, being polite is absolutely political, right? It's not just a way of being. And perhaps we don't think of it because it's such a subtle ideology, but yet is something that prevails. And from your experience, and outside of your research, what do you think, or what do you find most challenging about engaging with ideologies that oppose your own?
Well, piggybacking off Jeff's answer,
Mm.
I think it's that generally I don't think we are equipped. Maybe past generations were, but I don't think this generation is equipped to rationalize like in a middle space.
Mm.
Because I don't think we have the vocabulary, because obviously linguistically we've grown up in this not only era of social media but of like othering.
Mm.
And so I don't think that we have the capacity also of, because of social media and like echo chambers, to engage like
Yeah.
genuinely and honestly and perhaps without prejudice.
Mhm.
So I think the hardest thing about interacting with the other side is
Yeah.
to like create a safe space where you can do that and
Mhm.
you have the tools to do that, because I don't think that society, especially for young people as it is now, is built to have those conversations openly. There's not like a debate forum.
Mm.
It's just like Twitter, and Twitter is not a debate forum. It's not built for that. So I think
Right.
that's the hardest thing.
I think, well, for me, it's to start even looking at the other side in the first place. I think that usually you have to purposefully want to watch the other side of the internet in order to see it, because if you don't want to, you're going to get inside your bubble. And for me, that's the hardest part. In this case, I did it because of my research. And sometimes I ironically enjoy watching videos of conservative people. But of course, if you want to engage in a critical way with conservative media, you gotta get rid of your own thoughts and start thinking about how is language used in this case, what do they want to do, and after that I can purposefully engage with the text using my own critical thinking. So that's it.
Good, good. And thinking about, I mean, it's such a hard thing, especially with echo chambers or being stuck in the algorithm, right? That's another way that we understand it. But that doesn't only happen like with social media. It happens with their own literature. The types of book we read, right? We curate ourselves. Perhaps it's not an algorithm, but we still have like that mechanism very much ingrained in us. And yes, so I don't know. Did you find anything, a challenge or something that you encounter that challenged your personal beliefs or assumptions during this research? Since you're dealing with the othering.
I would say that no, but because I look at such a small sample of
Right.
videos, and of course there are longer videos. I remember once watching a video about vegetarianism, and at that moment, yeah, that video kind of channeled certain views of what I had. But in this case, I would say that no, because it's such a small topic, and after analyzing the text, trying to detach myself from what I thought, I still can see how there is an interest in rectifying certain ideas. In this case, this video is basically an excuse to talk about fracking, to reivindicate its image in order to say, like, yeah, fracking is good, and we should do fracking, and it does not present any kind of objective data. It just relies on evaluations, positive evaluations that are not backed by information. So that's my take.
Good.
Yeah, I would say not really, just like maybe because it's a somewhat outdated text, and it was
Right.
maybe one of like the first iterations of this idea in fiction, maybe. And so I would say that not foundationally, but there were certainly things in the text that are much more updated or criticized today that maybe, but not in like a foundational way that I was like, this is so far from my beliefs. Oh my god.
Right. Thank you. And which leads us to another question. Outside of your research, have you encountered texts that you feel that have fundamentally changed you? Either in social media, YouTube, text.
Well,
Yeah.
there is one book series, but it's kind of like popular, it's
Ah,
not like
yeah.
a classic, but there's a series called Scythe by Neil Shusterman, and that's also a dystopia. And right, like dystopia is not the only genre that can offer high political commentary, but in this particular case, I thought it was so well done how it talks about like infinite progress and like AI, and it was like I think one of the first sci-fis that kind of incorporated that in a much more sophisticated way and not like a gimmick. And I would say that kind of shaped my belief on how, not just my belief on what the world might look like, but also like our moral responsibility within that.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Well, in my case, I think it's just the sum of its parts. Basically, if I have, I've grown, I've seen a lot of content, and eventually I come with my own view of the world. But I wouldn't say that there is this specific piece of media that has changed radically my point of view. I think that the most view-defined type of media are long videos which make a point and they are very thorough in the way they make it. But I cannot identify a single video which has basically transformed all the way I thought about the world. So.
Thank you, thank you. Yes, especially those essays like in YouTube, which have like the essay format, but it's spoken. But absolutely. And just to continue our talk about changes and the different discourse, you talk about utopian vision, right? You talk about the utopian vision, and you, the idealized conservative. Why do you think those are popular genres, or why do you think they can have such an impact?
Well, in the case of in the case of utopian literature, as I mentioned, it's like one of the most high-functioning commentary genres. Of course, you can find commentary in any genre, but utopia fiction and science fiction have this like inherent quality of literally taking like one aspect of society and like aggrandizing it so that we can observe its effects. And that inherently makes it like very effective tool. And I think that is why it's so popular, because especially since it's such a popular genre, it's not like a niche thing where like discourse runs out quickly. It's there's so many, so you can pick like from classical sci-fi like Frankenstein to like more contemporary like Ursula K. Le Guin. Like you can pick, and especially those kinds of authors like Ursula K. Le Guin and even Brandon Sanderson in fantasy. Like they have these worlds where each book represents like an aspect of humanity or like a creative vision. And so I think it's popular because you can choose like which aspect of humanity to explore. It's almost like a game. So I think there's this sort of course, because it's escapism and it can be very entertaining, but also because you can narrow like your vision to certain aspects of humanity, and I think that makes it very interesting.
Thank you.
Well, in my case, I think that the idea of the idealized conservative is quite appealing for certain groups because of how it interacts with the ego of certain people. So it's quite interesting because you have this idealized idea of what is a conservative, and in all cases it's something that makes them better. So you see how we are the real environmentalists, but we're not like environmentalists of the left who do this kind of stuff, but they fail. No, we can do this, and at the same time we can improve the economy. So in that sense, I remember seeing a lot of internet videos from before 2015, as I said, and most of the appeal is in seeing how smart these people are, how well versed they are, and this is an image, an aspirational image, something to aim for that is spread by these types of videos. So I think it's appealing basically because of it appeals to the ego of one person to want it to become better, but in this way, which is not couldn't be the best. But no, that's it.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, I completely agree with both of your perspective, because it also helps you to detach from it, right? To have these ideas that are a bit further from us and not necessarily in our reality. But thinking about the idealized conservative, do you think there's also the idealized progressive? And what does that look like? What is the idealized progressive?
Well, I'm going to
Yeah,
answer over the fly, but to start with, I think the phenomenon is the same because in the right you can see that there's specifically in the YouTube right, political right, you see that there is the building of certain personalities, people who are basically the ideas of the ideal conservatives, and in the past, it was I found him wrong. Ben Shapiro, for instance,
Right.
he was known as a very well-versed person who is very smart and all, and he appeared destroying people on the internet. But in the case of the left, we don't find that type of idealized or internet personality. His this representation of what we want as left, and I would say that this is because as left we find people are separated over a bunch of different collectives, all belonging to the left, but at the same time not to the same branch of the left.
Right.
I would say that that's the reason we find, for instance, el Frente Amplio, which is fairly separated. It's a bunch of groups. So at the same time, for instance, in feminism, we find that people there are a lot of intersectionalities. We talk about feminism from a veganism perspective, feminism from a class perspective, from a class and vegetarianism perspective. And because of this, there is not a single image of what is an idealized leftist, I would say. But, yeah.
Yeah. Agreed?
Yeah, that's I was going to say that, like, there's a lot more of the. I also think that recently it's been very like caricature, like very mocked, I guess.
Yeah.
Like this idea of like the perfect liberal or like the
Yeah.
like the woke left, and it's like it seems that there's a lot of disagreements also, like Jeff said, of what is actually like a good. Like now, if you know, there's certain people that say certain things, and it's like, well, not like that, you know. So I think maybe it's an issue of like kind of like intersectionality and like perfection you can't reach.
Good.
Yeah. With that question, there is also the fact that most like leftist online personalities are not mainly personalities first. Like I don't know, in the case of the US, I would say like Alexa Cortez-Ocasio.
Right.
Like for example, or I don't know, someone like Sarah Med, or I don't know, like the one case I would say is like a streamer, like Hassan. But he's more of a joke, to be honest, for me. More like someone to be idolized to.
Right.
But in contrast, I would say that the idolized leftist figure is not first an online figure, I would say.
That's interesting. Yeah, Charlie.
I think
Charlie.
also, like, it depends on who's asking. My idea
Yeah, I was gonna say.
What does a lefty look like? You know, how do they act? What do they believe? My ideas are so different, for example, my parents like this.
Right.
But to someone that grew up in a different socioeconomic class. You know what I mean? So I feel like it's also just it's so complex.
Absolutely.
On both sides.
Yeah, because I feel like if there were more conservatives here, they would be screaming at us.
Oh yeah.
They would be like, "What are you saying right now?" Yes, dear.
May I speak?
Yes.
Well, I think the left values a lot more
a lot of voices.
Yeah.
And the right, on the other hand, especially the alt-right, the far-right, kind of creates some mythic past that was perfect and unified, and we must return to that. So that's the reason I think why the right tends to come up with these idealized versions of things, because they think everything should be the same. This is the ideal way.
Yeah.
While the left values a lot more
Diversity.
variety of ideas and identities and how they interact.
Yeah. Yes, Javier. Fuerte, ¿no?
So taking into account like all these talk about the ideal political candidate, and considering this way of building community that
Yeah.
Jefferson talked about, do you? This is a question for Jefferson. Do you think like this way of building community can be seen in the other side of the political spectrum, or is it, or do you think it is like exclusive to conservative? Like a conservative way of thought.
Well, I think it can be seen. It can be seen, but it's of course the content is different because it's aimed at different people. So I have a bunch of examples from people from the left making videos. But of course, nothing comes close to this spectacle, which is videos within this conservative point of view. The way the community is built within progressive channels, that's something I cannot speak for because I haven't studied it. But I think it's very interesting. It's probably a topic for a research in itself,
Definitely.
and you can even make
masterpiece.
a comparative comparative a study of how these people build community, while these other people also build community.
Yes, and yeah, I just wanted to add as well that we see this phenomenon in fandoms as well, right? And I was just thinking about BookTuber or Book Instagram, Book Talk. They tend to use very similar strategies that what Jefferson was talking about. In order to appeal, and in this case to be like, read the type of book I'm reading. And there we have like, even if you think about it a bit more, it is still very much this dichotomy of progressive versus liberal, especially if we talk about those books that have explicit or not, or that just romantic or that just fantasy. And you see an agenda being pushed there, right? Almost like women's sexuality, liberation, there's more conflict, whereas other books tends to be a bit more light, quote unquote, because we still can find different types of narratives. But it's definitely is the same type of mechanism in the affiliation that Jefferson was talking about, right? Yes.
I've seen something very similar, like in a broader scale.
Yeah.
Not only when talking about books, but also when talking about fiction in general.
Yes.
And dark topics in fiction.
Yeah.
It's really fierce discourse in Twitter, Twitter especially.
Mm-hmm.
As you said, it's very clear, like this way of closing the dialogue and this narrative of us versus them.
Absolutely. Absolutely, and we see it in every language as well, right? Like we're talking this in English, but then we find it in every language, find it in Spanish, and that is also very interesting because it's across cultures. It's not just. Yes. So, are there any final thoughts, reflections that you would like to share with us from your research or from this conversation?
Well, it's just like reiterating the points that I made in the conclusion, but I think it's worth thinking about how the fiction we read today comes packaged, basically, like especially considering the original novel that I discussed was just published in a newspaper, like, and we don't really see that type of publication as widespread anymore. I think it's interesting to note that even though obviously the landscape has changed so much from Victorian literature, there is still the same potential in literature, but also just to think about how we consume that and how it's paired, let's say, with our like current lifestyles, especially considering social media, which turned out to be quite nice, like
connected. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, in my case, it would be a call to action. This is a pretty interesting topic, but it's understudied. Basically, affiliation in affiliation in conservative media or affiliation in other types of online discourse. It's pretty understudied. So I invite people to engage with text critically, to look at the language, to study it, and to see what conclusions to draw from it. I think that it's always interesting to look at what are we looking to, for a moment, stop and think about what we like to see. And that is basically what I've done in this case with the study. So I hope you liked it, and that's very much it.
Thank you.
Thank
you
you.
very much.
Before finishing this panel, we have a few questions for both of our panelists here. La primera pregunta es para Francisca y la hace Nata Ligeria. Ella pregunta, how do you think contemporary efforts to democratize literature, such as piracy, both online and offline, may have changed the way escapism, works in the last century compared to Victorian times?
Excellent question.
Very loaded question.
Yeah. Well, we discussed in the original analysis that escapism historically has been, and literature historically, but also escapism has been much more geared towards upper class, very comfortable readers. And I think it's a great thing that books and escapism is now not just available to the high class, quote unquote, but also just anybody. Actually, while I was making the PowerPoint and like going over the paper, which I wrote like a year ago, I was thinking like, I don't know if this is true anymore, because I'm thinking now there's people like in war zones that literally watch YouTube videos because they're like, there's a war going on outside, I need to do something else, like I need to distract myself. And so I think piracy is a great like accessibility tool that lets escapism be not just for the cómodos, let's say, but for anybody. And I think that amplifies not only the readership, which is an important thing considering the call to action, but also it amplifies the people that actually need escapism the most, and allows for this resource to not just be like detached from reality, but also an active participant in the real world that we experience. So yeah, great question. I think that it's a great thing, yes.
Thank you, Francisca. And also we have a question for Jefferson. Jeff, the question is, do you think this way of building community is exclusive to conservative media, or could we find similar discourse resources on other sides of this political spectrum?
Oh, well, that's basically the same question as before, but I had to repeat myself, basically. Sorry.
We have another question for you.
Yeah.
If you prefer that. Yes?
That was answered.
Okay,
Yay,
let's go
perfect.
with that one.
En realidad es para ambos. You can answer this question. Considering what Jefferson has said about community and affiliation, do you think that the fact Nowhere was published within the context of a socialist journal could be considered an act of affiliation as well? Do you think the context of your research gives some background to this question?
Well, yeah, definitely. I mean, the readership of Nowhere was already predisposed to the ideas in the text, and it was always going to be like a pleasurable read for them. But also considering who was subscribed to this paper and who ran in Morris's literary circle, it was affluent people with money, with power. They were already much more prone to do or take part in the call to action and not just leave this as a theoretical text, but they're reading a newspaper. So they're already engaged with how this translates to real life. But I would say that because the text has kind of exceeded its context. I mean, you can find it in its own publication now. It's like a proper novel. It's not like a newspaper story anymore. I think that the current context right now, like the original context was definitely, there was definitely like a lot of affiliation, but I think that now it's a little more open because it's not tied to this journal as tightly anymore.
Well, I can complement with a little bit of theory, and I don't remember the exact word for it, but basically there's certain types of actions which, by their mere when they are done, they say something about, they make a statement through actions. I don't remember the exact theory, but we can see it from the systemic functional linguistic perspective, for instance. There are explicit and implicit evaluations, and these are done through language. So, of course, implicit evaluations come from a wide range of language resources. And, of course, an action itself may not be a language resource, but you can see it from that perspective as an implicit way of making a statement. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Antes de cerrar este panel, queremos agradecer a Camila Galdames por haber moderado. Por favor, le queremos dar un aplauso. Fue un panel increíble. También agradecerles a Jefferson y a Francisca. A Camila le queremos dar un pequeño reconocimiento porque nos acompañó, hizo un tremendo trabajo. Así que muchísimas gracias, Camila, por acompañarnos.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, always. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Y también, para cerrar nuestro panel, queremos invitar a Grecia Damaris, quien va a cerrar este panel con la lectura de su interludio creativo llamado Excelentísimo, Señor Wenceslao. Así que ojalá que les guste porque a nosotros nos encantó. Un aplauso, por favor, para Grecia.
Buenos días, muchas gracias por estar presentes. ¿Se escucha bien? Excelentísimo señor Wenceslao. Estimado señor Wenceslao, permítame la osadía de pronunciar la siguiente palabra, bacalao. Después de escuchar este ridículo apodo familiar, sabrá usted por qué lo llamé. El joven Sphere se ha vuelto loco. Lleva más de 37 días deshonrando su gran nombre. Maldice a los puercos diciéndoles que son bastardos suyos. Esas pobres criaturas llevan por nombre Bacalao I, Bacalao II, Bacalao III y sigue. Ya sabe usted que en Perlicia estos animales abundan. Cuando arribamos, hace 40 días, lo observé con ánimo usual, amargado, excéntrico y a regañadientes de su labor. Temo que estuvo contemplando la cúpula tornasol de esta eterna ínsula otoñal, hasta que causó la convulsión de su razón. Maldice todo lo que nunca maldijo antes. Después se vuelve melancólico y llora como un demonio. ¿Supiera usted que ayer se revolcó como un puerco entre las hojas? Gritaba, «Hermanos, mátenme». Pero estos le han dicho, «Eres bastardo, pero no hermano», y se han reído de él. Oh, permítame, debe saber que soy una de las llegadas de primera fase. He tenido la gracia de escuchar de usted por él. Ha dicho que es un tirano con nombre sonso. No, no vaya a tomar esto por altanería o trampa. Señor, estoy desesperada. Mis razones son probar la falsedad de los dichos de este. No tuve el honor de estar frente suyo sino hasta hoy. Sin embargo, me arrojaría a la temible tracturnia que habita en su majestuoso mar, antes de aceptar las malcriadeces que su hijo me reveló. Su cólera se debe a que siempre fue joven y rabioso. Nunca fue injusto que, siendo el primero, lo mandara a encargarse de los llegados de primera fase. Sabrá el Señor por qué tomó esa sabia decisión. Previo a su desquicio, ya nombraba a sus hermanos como Pisciano y Andrócaca. Sin duda, su majestad tuvo razón en no otorgarle más merecimiento. Si dispuso su bendita gracia al príncipe Tiziano, es porque siendo el segundo y al no tener virtudes, quiso ver en él las capacidades mínimas de liderar la segunda fase de llegados, y la gracia suprema de la tercera fase otorgada a la princesa Andrómaca es porque a pesar de tener 18 años y haber conspirado a los 16, su sabio instinto reconoció en ella la valentía y vileza que un principiante Sphere jamás tendría. Mi señor, confío en su juicio y en su bondad. Sin embargo, el delirio en el que el miserable se encuentra pone en riesgo mi permanencia según las leyes que usted ha establecido para todos los llegados. Siendo padre de esa criatura demoníaca, debe rescatarlo inmediatamente. ¿Conoce usted el dicho, se vuelve loco quien dice muchas mentiras o muchas verdades? De no hacerlo, su reputación estará a manos de uno. Un excelentísimo soberano como usted no permitiría semejante cuchicheo bajo ninguna cúpula. Mi señor Bacalao, quiero decir, Wenceslao, solicito su justicia. Cure a su hijo, o bien, elija por favor entre los restantes guías de primera fase el sustituto idóneo para mí. Ninguna locura puede intervenir el camino de su humilde purgadora que debe continuar. Muchas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, Grecia. Fue un texto increíble y perfecto para este panel, pensando fuera del texto. A todos también les queremos agradecerle a la audiencia por habernos acompañado en este panel. Los invitamos a un break de 10 minutos y nos volvemos a ver a las 11. Muchas gracias. Antes que se vayan, queremos informarles que tenemos los resultados del sorteo del primer premio. Nuestra ganadora es Nata Ligeria, porque hizo unas buenas preguntas. Muchas gracias, Nati. Pasa por favor adelante para recibir tu premio. Así que ya saben, si quieren ganarse unos increíbles premios como tote bags del coloquio y ciertos libros, participen por favor, participen en nuestro coloquio a través del código QR. Muchas gracias. Nos vemos en 10 minutos.
¿Lo saco?
Oh my goodness.
¿Cómo hicieron?